Hello and welcome from Westminster Libraries. My name is Monica and I'm delighted to welcome back Kate Macdonald for a new series of talks with Handheld Press. Today's talk will be on women in Bohemian London and is part of Women's History Month. Kate is a literary historian and the director of Handheld Press. And this afternoon, Kate is in conversation with Sarah LeFanu, author, broadcaster, and biographer of Rose Macaulay. Sarah is the author of the introduction to this remarkable lost novel, The Latchkey Ladies, written in 1921 by Rose Macaulay. It is a novel about single women's lives in post-war Bohemian London. Before we get going, just to let you know that the talk will be approximately 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. Do feel free to send us your questions at any point during the talk. The chat feature has been turned off, so please type all your comments in the Q&A. The moderator, Sarah, is here with me this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing your questions. Well, that's all for me now. I shall hand over to Kate and Sarah.
Well, thank you, Monica. This is Kate from Handheld, and the screen you're looking at now is like an advert at the beginning of the talk, because I'm going to be doing a new talk on women writing war to raise money for Ukrainian refugee relief on the 30th of March. If you'd like to sign up for it, all proceeds are going to go to the Disasters Emergencies Committee for Ukrainian Humanitarian Appeal. The event, you can probably find the event just by going straight to Eventbrite and typing in Women Writing War. Otherwise, go to the Handheld Press events page or just email me and I'll send you the link. It would be really great if we could raise a decent amount of money. We've got over £150 raised already, which is very nice. I could do with a lot more. So you can take away the slide now, Sarah. Thanks. And now we have Sarah LeFanu. Sarah, can you wave your hand?
Hi. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
So Sarah and I are going to be in conversation talking about the new book we brought out, which is Latchkey Ladies by Marjorie Grant, not Rose Macaulay. And I have a copy here. The title will probably come out back to front on your screen, but that's what it looks like. We did an event yesterday in the Guildhall Library, so we have already talked about it. And for the purposes of today's talk, we're talking in a slightly different direction. So we are going to be talking about Latchkey Ladies by Marjorie Grant, but we're also going to be touching on briefly some of the works of the same period by Rose Macaulay, because Sarah is the expert on Rose Macaulay. Handheld have published a lot by Rose Macaulay. I'm going to go back to the original description of how we sold this talk to you. It says, we're going to be talking about the lives and choices of modern women at the end of the First World War, where they lived, their new freedoms, and what a girl could do when she had broken the fine line between independence and disaster. And after rereading the novel, I think what that pretty much means is, what does a girl do when she gets pregnant in 1918? So I think we're going to come back to that. Sarah, can we begin? Can you make the connection between Rose Macaulay and Marjorie Grant? Because some of our listeners may already know about Rose Macaulay, because I have banged on about her a lot to this particular audience, but I don't think anyone will have heard of Marjorie Grant. Can you put them in context?
Right, okay. Well, to give you a bit of biographical background to Marjorie Grant. So she was born in Canada, in French Canada, in Quebec, into an English-speaking family. In her early 30s, around about 30, the First World War broke out, and she came over to France and volunteered with the French Red Cross. Now, I don't know actually anything about her war record. I've tried to find out about it, but I haven't managed to, and it's a bit confusing because there was actually another Marjorie Cook, not Grant Cook, from Canada, but I've eliminated her as a suspect, because she actually then later went back to Ottawa. So our Marjorie Grant, or Marjorie Grant Cook, wrote a novel stroke memoir about her experiences in France called Verdun Days in Paris. I think that it is really quite closely drawn on her personal experience. So it seems to me that what happened was that she didn't last very long in the military hospitals, but then she moved up to Paris. She'd started off out, further south, but she moved up to Paris and ran a food production center, kind of canteen, for the soldiers coming back from the front, for the wounded soldiers, and for the civilians who were suffering at the time, and the refugee children and so on. She came over to London and she published that novel with William Collins. And there at William Collins, she met Gerald O'Donovan, who was a novelist, an ex-priest as well, but a novelist. And he, at around about the same time, he met Rose Macaulay. And the three of them became close friends and writing colleagues. I mean, they were all writing novels at the same time.
Right.
Marjorie became a friend of the O'Donovan family, as indeed did Rose. And those listeners of yours who are familiar with Rose Macaulay's story will know that Rose and Gerald, sometime in the early 1920s, I can't remember exactly, but 21 or 22, in fact became lovers. And their love affair lasted for 20 years until Gerald died in 1942.
And it was secret.
And it was secret. It was, I think that later on, Victor Gollancz, who was a close friend of Rose's, said that it was one of the best kept secrets in London. I think that Marjorie knew about it. I mean, I think it would be impossible for her not to know about it. They were very much welcomed into the O'Donovan household by Beryl O'Donovan, and the two of them later on became godparents to the O'Donovan grandchildren. There were two little girls, and each one of them became a godmother to one of them, and acted in a godmotherly way throughout their childhoods. So Marjorie and Rose were friends on a personal level. They were connected through this family and through this charismatic man, Gerald O'Donovan, with whom Rose was having an affair. And I don't know what Marjorie Grant's feelings were towards him. But they also were linked by the fact that they were, all of them, writing novels.
Yeah, and a very productive period of novel writing, certainly for Rose and also for Gerald at the time. And Marjorie, so she wrote the Verdun Days book, and then she produced this novel, Latchkey Ladies, published in 1921. So she was writing it 1919, 1920, then it went into production. And then there was another novel, and then there was a great hiatus. What was she doing? Why did the stream of novels stop?
Well, it seemed as if she dropped out of public life altogether, because after the third novel, which was called Another Way of Love, which came out in 23, I think, kind of nothing. In fact, what she was doing was she was reviewing prolifically for the Times Literary Supplement. She reviewed over 1,000 books for them over the next decade, and her interests ranged widely. So she was reviewing books by contemporary British novelists, especially by women. So she was reviewing novels by Elizabeth Bowen, by Rosamund Lehman. She was also interested in American writing. She was a great champion of the writer Willa Cather, but she didn't just write reviews of literary books either. So she was keen on Richmel Crompton, who wrote the Just William books. And indeed, she reviewed The Hobbit when it came out.
And she liked it.
She liked it. I seem to remember that she called it enchanting, which is fair enough, eh?
And that would have given her a reasonable income as well, wouldn't it?
Indeed,
writing for the TLS, even though it was anonymous at the time, you could earn a living by reviewing, but you had to read fast.
Yes.
So you calculated she read a book a week.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would explain why she wasn't producing novels during that period. I mean, not only that there was no time, but also when you're thinking about other people's books the whole time. I mean, they kind of take up your headspace. So I think that it's very difficult to get on with your own work, although I know that a lot of writers nowadays and in the past have actually, earned their living by that or by teaching. I mean, it's always kind of a bit of a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, well, one of the many interesting things about Marjorie was, I mean, you know, so she seemed to vanish from public view. And it wasn't actually until the archives were opened up in the 1990s, the TLS archives, that it was revealed that that she had that she had done all this work for them, because
So
they carried on being anonymous up until the 1970s.
Yeah.
But then she became a novelist again, but under a completely different name. So she then started publishing novels under the name of Caroline Seaford. And when the first of the Caroline Seaford novels came out, which I think was something like 1934, it was received as a debut novel.
Yeah, very.
Nobody made the connection between Caroline Seaford and Marjorie Grant. And why should they have?
No, indeed. And in her later phase of novels, did she go back to the territory she covered in Latchkey Ladies, which was Bohemian London, young women working in their first jobs? Was that something she wanted to come back to, or did she go into different areas?
Well, she didn't come back to it. I mean, I think it's kind of odd and surprising in a way, considering the well, I suppose kind of the vitality that I think there is in Latchkey Ladies, this kind of passionate interest in how women, and in particular young women, live their lives in an urban setting. But actually, she doesn't come back to it. I mean, some of her other novels are set in her native French Canada, and 2 or 3 of the Caroline Seaford novels are set in England, but with a completely different background. They're kind of country house, family comedies of manner, that sort of thing. So I think it's rather surprising, but Latchkey Ladies, you know, stands out amongst her novels.
How old was she when Latchkey Ladies came out, roughly?
She must have been in her late 30s.
Late 30s.
Yeah,
Rose Macaulay about the same age.
They were of an age, yeah.
Yeah, I find this interesting. So they're both mid to late 30s and they're writing novels, because Rose was writing Whatnot and Potterism at about the same time that Latchkey Ladies was being gestated. They're writing novels about much younger women in their early to mid 20s. So that's nice. I mean, obviously they can remember what it was like. But their focus is on this change, this movement from being part of a family to being independent. And the women they were writing about were almost the first generation of women in Britain to be genuinely financially, economically independent of the parental income, for example. Women who did not need to get married to have a life, to survive, to be able to eat. And it must have been a really exciting atmosphere just to have that possibility, that socially sanctioned freedom at last.
Yes, absolutely. Now, while you were saying that, I just had a thought, and it's something that I hadn't thought about before, which is that both Rose Macaulay and Marjorie Grant Cook were quite late in leaving their family homes and coming to the great metropolis. Because in fact, Rose stayed with her mother for a long time. I mean, she kind of made little forays into London from about 1910 onwards, but she was still living outside London with her mother. And it wasn't really till she got a job with the Ministry of Information or whatever it was, that she moved to London. Marjorie Grant Cook, okay, so she moved from Canada and went to France, but that was wartime France, and it was only then that she came to London. So I think that they were kind of living that excitement then, but maybe, you know, a bit older than some of the other young women that they saw around them, who were streaming into the offices post-war, who were, you know, walking the streets of London and so on. And so maybe it just kind of seemed natural to them to write about women who were kind of, you know, 8 or 10 years younger than them.
But with a more mature understanding of what might lie ahead and what the dangers might be.
Exactly.
Which is possibly why the books are what they're about. So a quick précis of Latchkey Ladies. The plot is, it starts in the Mimosa Club, which is a rather nice boarding house run by a widow, and it's established to give young women a home, a room to live in, and also women living in digs other boarding houses to come in and have their meals. So it's a place young women and single women of all descriptions can sit and be warm and comfortable and socialize with friends, have a place to bring someone to meet. It's a club. And you have 4 particular women, 4 or 5. Most of them are young single women working in offices. And there's a couple of older ones, an older lady living with a companion in the Mimosa Club. And the plot kind of expands from there like a flower, following the paths of 2 or 3 of these people. And we are taken into Bohemia and the possibilities of Bohemia. And what I mean by Bohemia is not quite the seedy underbelly of London society, but the raffish showgirl society, theatreland, going to parties in men's houses, and there may or may not be a chaperone, and this would have been really daring for the period. Going to restaurants with men, going out to Piccadilly Circus and picking up a man so he will take you to a restaurant and buy you dinner, possibly drinks. The drinking is pretty mild. I mean, there is barely any drinking. There are certainly no drugs, nothing. I mean, given the extremes that Marjorie Grant goes to in describing what happens when sex occurs, it's quite interesting that she does not go near the drug-taking culture. That wasn't her interest. Other novels like Beverly Nichols' Self of 1922, that goes all out for drug-taking drama, as well as adultery and marriage. And that's a much darker novel and frankly really unreadable, very melodramatic. The Latchkey Ladies follows Anne Carey, who's a young office worker who doesn't want to be an office worker, bored of her fiance because he is a bit boring. And then she meets a married man and starts an affair. She's working in a children's school. And then she gets pregnant. And then we have to find out what happens when she gets pregnant. The pregnancy is foreshadowed by the plight of a servant in the school that Anne works in. So that's extremely interesting because we're shown how pregnancy, what impact pregnancy has on certain sectors of society. And we can see it approaching Anne as her plight appears. But there are other women too. There's Petunia, who's an extraordinary creation, a showgirl of no known background who fascinates and allures. And then there is Makita, who is the most independent, self-sufficient, sprightly, joyful character. She's very happy to go to slightly dodgy houses to go to parties, but she knows how to look after herself. And then there are the young women. Well, there's definitely not so young women. There's Reggie, who's an ex-prostitute and probably still is a prostitute if anyone gave her a chance. She's quite a scary figure. And there are the women who are desperately keeping away from Bohemia because they're just either very snobbish or very upright and Victorian. And very sad things happens to one of them. So it's a whole mixture of what happens to single women, focusing on the Mimosa Club in London. It's a remarkable book. What would you say? What have I missed out, Sarah?
No, I mean, I think that's an absolutely brilliant summary of it and kind of overview of it. I mean, also what's interesting is the way that the different characters have different perspectives on these different lifestyles. So that, for example, so one of the men's houses that some of these girls go to, somebody called Simon Meebs, I think that it's Makita who suggests to Anne that they go there. Mm-hmm. And Anne says something like, oh, you know, she's heard of him. You know, isn't that where all the Bohemians hang out? And Makita says, not really. They're not Bohemian-like. And then she says, not Bohemians like you find in Brook Green or Chelsea. So obviously those were the two places where they hung out. And the way that she described those ones were, it was something to do with queer kinds of meals and living the studio way. But Simon Meebs is not like that. Now, what he does is he collects people. And he collects beautiful young girls, but also hanging around him, there are these men. I mean, for a wartime book, one of the interesting things is the amount of men that there are around. Okay, they're kind of back on leave or they're doing something, what's it called, for the Whitehall front.
Oh, they're staff officers.
They're on staff or whatever. But
they're wounded. Some are wounded.
Some are wounded, indeed. But you feel that some of them are kind of up to something kind of possibly a little bit shady. And it's in this house, which in fact, I think, it's not said, but I noticed on my last rereading of it that whenever there was talk of going to Simon's house, and it happens, I mean, it kind of punctuates the story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because important kind of meetings take
It's
place
a place
there.
of danger and
Exactly.
assignation. Yes.
Yeah. But people always refer to going up to Simon's house. And
Yes.
I think, I mean, when I think of London going up to, I tend to think that maybe means north. And I think maybe it does there, because these young women, well, the Mimosa Club is kind of Victoria stroke Pimlico. And that's
right.
mainly where they hang out. So I think that Simon's house is in Mayfair.
Clifford Street. It is Clifford Street.
Right. Okay. Mayfair.
So, yeah. And he is rich. He's a colonel in uniform, and he's and apparently he wears his khaki uniform as if it were velvet, which is quite a thought. So he's a very cat-like creature. He's not homosexual. You think he might be because of the velvet reference, but oh no, he's interested in having sex with the girls if they pique his interest sufficiently and if they allow it. It's shady is a good word for him. He's very strange. So that is the locus of Bohemianism in the novel. And I was thinking also, going back to Rose Macaulay, she already has written about a kind of Bohemia before. In fact, 4 of her previous, well, her earlier novels, you've got The Secret River The Furnace in 1907, Secret River 1909, and Views and Vagabonds and The Lee Shore in 1912, both came out the same year. They all deal with people slipping out of polite society, Victorian Edwardian values society, and picking it on their own, eating studio meals, not having proper jobs, living off other people, cadging money, all quite dubious behavior when you set it against the standard of the Victorian novel that had been had been the standard of social behavior. So Rose Macaulay has already explored that kind of society, men and women both, but none of it, I think very, very little of it is in London. The only London character who's a woman is a particularly horrible wife. There's a great poet, this is in The Secret River, a great poet, a bit like Rupert Brooke, with whom she was close friends before he died. A great poet who wants to live the life of a great artist, but he's married a very mercenary woman who wants him to be a great poet, if not the poet laureate. So we have this clash of cultures, establishment versus the artistic ideal.
Yes, I mean, I think that, that Rose Macaulay's Bohemians then, I mean, they were in the countryside or they were in Italy. I mean, a couple of those are set in Italy, aren't they? Yeah. Wandering up and down with a donkey and cart, I think.
Yeah, lots of donkeys.
Is in the furnace. And, I think it was because she hadn't yet experienced London. And when she did experience London, she loved it.
Yeah.
She took to London like a duck to water.
And they both Marjorie and Rose obviously experienced office life. So in Potterism and Whatnot by Macaulay and in Latchkey Ladies, these are 3 novels written within 3 years of each other. We get so many glimpses of office life and what it was like working in offices for women, and the positions that men held vis-a-vis the female clerks, the commute, how you got your laundry done, what you had to wear, the different petty rules and regulations. It's a fascinating insight into what we would now, well, in the before times, before our pandemic, what we would now consider normal office culture. And here we have it, it's been illustrated here almost as a contrast to the Bohemian side of life, which is also in the same novels.
Well, the women, in a sense, they do office life during the day and Bohemian life at night. Some of them, anyway. But I mean, I think what's fascinating about one of the things about Latchkey Ladies is that depiction of office life, and it's Anne's experience of the office, where she actually suffers sexual harassment and
major bullying.
Yeah, he puts his hand on this Canadian sergeant, puts his hand on her shoulder, and he reacts to that physical touch, which I think is quite unusual, really, because that kind of bullying or kind of low-level sexual harassment is something that women have been taught to put up with, or women have been expected to put up with. And the fact that he noticed it and responded negatively to it, well, I can't, it struck me as being an unusual depiction, and in a novel of that era.
It certainly gives her a very good excuse for getting out of the office, like just
Indeed.
throwing her job in, and yeah, and then she has to find new work, and then the plot just continues. There's also where people live, because the Mimosa Club is where some of the characters live, but for other characters like Makita and Anne, who share a flat, they live in absolutely lovely sounding little flats, where they don't have interference. And one of the things that Anne says right at the beginning, one of the benefits of having a latchkey, a key to let yourself into your own front door, so you don't have to have your father wait up and let you in because he won't let you have a key, is that you can live your life without interference. And that's exactly what Anne is doing. She's making her own choices all the way through the novel. And living with Makita, Makita does not interfere with her. Anne is having an affair under her nose, and Makita does not realize, because she's off having her own adventures, probably not sexual, because I don't think she's ever fallen in love in this novel. But Anne's lover can come to visit her, and that's why she gets pregnant. There is a very important scene when they go away for the first time, and this is something I think is absolutely extraordinary for the period. So you have a publisher publishing a novel about an adulterous affair, which describes what happened on the night. But yet the skill of Marjorie Grant's writing is you simply don't notice unless you look at the coded words. And the fact that you've got the yellow and the blue dressing gown hanging up on the wall opposite the end of the bed, and the rushing of the wind and things like that. Any other writer might have, would have got prosecuted, because this would have been an indecent novel. But yet,
I think I've marked that bit, Kate. Can I just read out that?
Yes, do.
Two sentences. So this is the farmhouse in the countryside down on Exmoor, where the two of them have gone off to have, to spend a week together. So she goes upstairs to bed before him. She sat on the edge of the bed and vaguely noticed that Mrs. Locke, who's the landlady, had hung her yellow silk dressing gown beside Dampier's dark blue one on two hooks in the wall at the foot of the bed. It's all very queer, Anne thought in a dream of unreality. She was like some little boat, tossed on the tide beneath an immeasurable sky. She had lost all sense of her personality, and the beating of the tide and the sound of her heart were one. And if that isn't a description of something or other, I don't know what is. And then they wake up the next morning.
And it doesn't say that Dampier is asleep beside her, but yeah.
But actually, anyway, listen, can we just go back a second?
Yeah.
Of what you were saying, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. And that what Anne gets and what she thrives on is this lack of interference from other people, the freedom that she has to do what she wants, to have a married lover if she wants, and so on and so on. However, I think that she is a conflicted character, and I think that a lot of the young women, who are able to go out and kind of see men and go out to theatre and things like that, they too are very much in two minds. And that a theme that runs through Latchkey Ladies is that, it is the freedom, the latchkey is what? It gives you the freedom to do what? And at one point, Anne meditates on it and says, it gives you the freedom to live and die unregarded, to be unloved, to be a nobody, to be completely and totally lonely. And she feels that when she's sitting by she feels that quite often, but it really comes to her as a kind of epiphany when she's sitting at the bedside of Miss Danby, who is dying of meningitis, who has had, it seems to Anne, who has had nothing in her life at all. And that's something that that Marjorie Grant comes back to, that in order to live the independent life, you need the means to do it, that to be poor is not to be free. You
need someone to fuss over you, as more than one character says. When you're coming home back from work and it's cold and wet, it's just lovely to know that someone's got the fire going and there is food in the fridge or on top of the cooker.
Yes, so that somebody wants to know, how your day went.
Yeah, and in fact, most of this novel is about Anne strengthening herself and finding the resources to stand on her own 2 feet and manage what fate has thrown at her in the way of an illegitimate baby on her own, because she accepts no help from anyone. She does accept money. Dampier has to leave. He's critically ill with pneumonia, and then he's told he has to go to hot climate, otherwise his heart will basically stop. So his wife whisks him off to California. And just before he goes, on their last meeting, he says to Anne, "Please let me give you money." And for the first time, she says, "Yes, I will take the money." Because at that point, she already knows she's pregnant, and she's not going to tell him. She will not allow him to have any part in this new adventure, if you like, of hers, which she knows she must see out on her own, which is such a strong action. But she's not stupid. She takes the money because she knows she's going to need it when she can't work.
And then later on, she says, "He gave up nothing for me." Okay, yeah. He doesn't know about it, but he gave up nothing for her.
Yeah, he did.
He sees that she carried that whole experience herself. It was hers. It was
in a way, yeah. She doesn't allow him to give things up, because he does say, "Let's go away. I'll just abandon my entire family, my 2 little boys, and we'll go off together." And she said, "No, you mustn't think of the boys, because you wanted children so they would have a happier life than you had when you were a boy." So that saying he gave up nothing, yes, he didn't, but he did offer, and she refused.
He did know she was pregnant as well.
That's true. He didn't know that. Anyhow, not that this is about this unhappy couple in love, just about them. We've also got the other characters, and I want to focus on Emma, the servant. So when Anne changes her job, she moves from the office job and goes to teach in her aunt's school. Her aunt, the elder Miss Carey, is a teacher, and she's in partnership with her best friend, her most beloved confidant. They are affinities to each other, which is such a nice phrase, Miss Molland, and they give each other loving nicknames, but they are companions in life and in business, and they run this school. And Anne actually went to this school herself as a young child, so she's very familiar with it. And in the school, there are a couple of servants. There's the cook, and there's Emma, who I think must be the maid of all work, the housemaid, the parlour maid. And Anne turns up after a long weekend or something and finds Miss Molland and Miss Carey absolutely horror-struck, because Emma has given birth the night before in the attic. And Anne's first response is, "Oh my God, how could you not know?" Which is fascinating, because these 2 Victorian maiden ladies clearly had no idea what pregnancy looked like. Because they are such good Christian women, they have averted their eyes from the very sight of a pregnant woman, which is bizarre. And their first action, once they realize that there's a newborn baby on the premises, is to throw Emma out of the house. She's taken off to a hospital somewhere with the baby. And Anne is absolutely horrified that this inhumanity, this appalling behavior, and Emma is got rid of because of shame and stigma. It's nothing to do with she needs better care in a hospital, because she's a perfectly fit and healthy woman. And that's what's very interesting. This servant girl from the working classes is depicted as having her baby as easily, well, not particularly easily, but she just gets on and does it. There's no fuss and bother. Yet later, when Anne herself is pregnant, she goes to another aunt, the other aunt she has, who gives her shelter. And she has her baby, but I think there's a bit more heavy weather made of it. So we have this story of the 2 women with illegitimate pregnancies treated entirely differently, but shame and stigma is still the central aspect of their experiences.
They share the shame and stigma. I mean, that is the experience for both of them, although they come from different classes. And I think it's interesting to think. I think that there is a bit of a tendency to think that things changed drastically after the First World War, after the end of the First World War. But actually, what we consider to be Victorian notions of propriety and, kind of social and moral notions, they had a long, long afterlife. And it wasn't until quite a bit later on that this idea of, the servant girl who has to give birth alone in the attic and then is thrown out, that was of that time, as well as of it being 19th century, which I think is how one kind of tends to think of it. And in fact, there's a novel by May Sinclair, which is set, I mean, it's published around about then, and I can't remember whether it says maybe it's just before the First World War, actually, but where something similar happens, and in fact, it's told from the point of view of the mistress of the house, who banishes this woman who has her illegitimate baby, and the baby dies, and she feels terrible remorse, but I mean, it's too late then. Yeah, so I think I think that is extremely realistic.
Yes, it is. We have the real life example of Dorothy Sayers, who had her illegitimate son 3 years after this novel was published. And she too had the money. She took herself off to a safe place where she could have the baby without interference, with no publicity. And then she handed the baby over to someone to look after. And he grew up into a fine man, and that was all good. But she never had the experience of being a mother in that sense. So Dorothy Sayers and Latchkey Ladies, contemporaneous.
And she wasn't able to tell anybody.
She could not tell anyone. That was the awful thing.
Her family wasn't able to tell her friends because it was so incredibly shameful.
Yeah.
And I think actually, that it's important to remember that carried on for a long time afterwards.
Yeah. And going back to the Bohemian aspect, I was much struck thinking about Emma the servant, because when the mistress of the house says, well, who was the father? Emma said, well, it could have been any of the soldiers I've been going out with, or Emma cannot be considered a member of Bohemian society. She is absolutely a working class woman who has her own sexual mores, and she does exactly what she likes because that's the way she wants to behave. Whereas the Bohemian ladies are much more focused on earning a living in the arts, possibly, or on the edges of prostitution, but exchanging their beauty and their sexual favors for income, with an awful lot more decorativeness. There's quite a different atmosphere about Bohemianism compared to just a working class woman getting pregnant by accident, but honestly, she doesn't seem to have cared that much.
They were all on the embankment, I think. She said it was one of those soldiers on the embankment.
Can you imagine? Good Lord, the discomfort. But anyway.
Rather brilliant, actually. No, completely different experience. I mean, Bohemianism is essentially a kind of a middle class movement, I think.
Yes.
I mean, and obviously there's boundaries are porous and people kind of move in and out. And I think for women, the Bohemian world actually was possibly a way of moving out of one class into another. And in fact, in Latchkey Ladies, that's what happens with Petunia. And Petunia, we learn quite late on, was originally picked up in Piccadilly Circus by Simon, who we have already talked about.
Yeah.
By the end of the novel, she is a stalwart member of Britain's landed gentry, and the proud mother of an heir to the acres in Surrey or wherever it is.
And
that's through the Bohemian world that she has actually moved up.
Yeah, which is such a traditional route, because from the 18th century you got the Gunning sisters marrying dukes and peers of the realm, and at the end of the 19th century you got London showgirls marrying titled gentlemen and becoming the mothers and grandmothers of many of the peers of today. I mean, it was a standard way to get to climb up the social circle, but they brought talent with them, talent and beauty. And that's what Petunia has. She has a certain talent. She has absolute beauty. She has a serious charm. She can talk to anyone, and just her charisma is phenomenal. And these are not negligible qualities. They have value. They have not commercial value, but they have some kind of exchange value. And exchanging these for a seat as the wife of the gentry is why not? It's normal.
Yes, and also I think what's really nice is that Petunia charms her women friends as well. So both Makita and Anne, although Anne is sometimes a little bit moralising about her, they love her beauty. They love her charm.
They do.
They love her kind of her young innocence, which actually isn't innocent at all, but she pretends that it is. And so that makes us like her as well. So it's not just that she's using her charm to get a man or to or to marry the right person or anything like that. I mean, it is it's in a sense, it's a kind of gift that she gives to.
Yeah,
to,
and in a way,
the
sad thing is that she really would quite rather stay in Bohemia. She's married, not quite against her will, but because she cannot withstand this man who is determined that because he's in love with her, she will become the wife of his wife and the mother of his children, and the chatelaine of his great estate. And she would much rather just keep going to parties and going round to Simon's and having lots of drinks. But no, she's swept off, and she's to be rich.
He treats her with too much respect, doesn't he? There's at one point she says something like, when I'm alone with him, he treats me in exactly the same way as if we were in a room full of people.
It's very disappointing,
sad, actually.
Yeah, he doesn't make a pounce. It's terrible. Oh my goodness. Well, I think we've probably reached 40 minutes. I think if anyone has any questions, now would be a good time to throw them at us. Monica, could you open the gates to the questions, please? I think you're muted.
We have a few questions. Thank you, everyone. Do keep them coming if you wish so. And then we have Christian, who's asking, have you already found a Dutch publisher for Latchkey Ladies?
Well, no, but I was talking to a Dutch publisher this morning about it. So I may have found one, but the copyright issue is a little awkward because Marjorie Grant Cook died in 1969, so she is well within copyright. She left her estate to, I think, a cousin, and the cousin has died, we heard, in the last 20 years, but we have no information about whether the cousin remembered that she owned the rights or was the administrator of the estate. And we don't know where the estate has gone. Effectively, it's a lost estate. So we have made our own arrangements in the interim. So if the estate get in touch with us, we can go into discussions and sort that out. But personally, I would be quite wary of taking this on for translation rights. I certainly feel I have no right to sell translation rights. If that answers the question.
The next question is, Melissa is asking, I was thinking I remember DLS's Harriet Vayne moving in boho circles.
Yeah. Harriet Vayne, yes, of course. In Mecklenburg Square, and Francesca, oh heavens, Square Haunting by Francesca Wade. Francesca Wade, a very, very good study of this particular square in London where women lived and in and out. And it was a bit Bohemian, but not shabbily so. But yeah, that's a terrific book if you want more about locations for Bohemia.
And first of all, Dorothy Sayers lived in St George's Square in Pimlico.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, which I lived in, oddly.
Did you?
Yes, in the 1970s. I was a latchkey lady with my friend Michelle Roberts and with my brother and my brother's girlfriend. I mean, latchkey ladies were a bit different in those days. It tended to be kind of a flat share rather than just do or whatever. But St George's Square is where Dorothy Sayers placed Miss Climpson's cattery,
yes,
which was the so-called, the pretend, or not pretend, but the typing bureau, which looked as if it was full of, kind of rather miserable old ladies who were latchkey ladies and, and had no homes to go to. But in fact, they were all rather brilliant sleuths and were sent out by Miss Climpson under the direction of Lord Peter Wimsey, because basically people don't notice, dowdy looking elderly women, although they probably weren't that elderly actually.
They're probably younger than us.
Dowdy looking single women who are busy listening to the conversations that are going on and taking notes or whatever. Anyway, that was St George's Square in Pimlico.
Yeah.
Yes, now Harriet Vayne, Dorothy Sayers invented Harriet Vayne, a few years after she herself had these experiences. So she was I think she was like kind of an alter ego. Yeah,
and Harriet and Peter, when Lord Peter goes into Bohemia to search for information, he goes to see artist friends, or friends who he met through Harriet, and he gets the lowdown on certain aspects of Bohemian society because of his contacts in Bohemia. It's a very useful resource, as does Albert Campion in Marjorie Allingham's novels. He swims in Bohemia. He really does.
And next, Faye says she's reminded of the works by Muriel Spark.
A little bit later, I'm not much of a Sparkian. I've never really enjoyed Muriel Spark. Respect, absolutely respect, yes, but I can't enjoy reading her. But you said yesterday, Sarah, The Girls with Slender Means, that was 1956, or something like that, which is,
sometime.
yeah, so that's a London
yes,
boarding house of women.
Working girls living in a house in London.
Yeah, but I don't think she wrote about that pre-war. It was only after the war, the Second War, wasn't it?
Oh gosh,
I don't recollect her being a 30s writer.
No, but I mean, she does write a lot about working women.
Yes, yes, she does.
Women in offices, indeed.
Yeah,
a number of her novels.
Yeah,
with that.
not so much Bohemia. Well, certainly not Bohemia in the 20s and 30s, but maybe later. Well, Jean Rhys, my God, Jean Rhys. If anyone was Bohemian, it has to be her and her characters. Formidable.
Next comment is by Catherine Hayes, and she's saying, I was going to ask about D.L. Sawyers, and you have mentioned her. Although the whimsy stories focus on him, there are loads of hints and allusions about women's working life, if they're single and they're unable to marry. Harriet Vayne is a definite latchkey bohemian. She's an orphan, so she can choose. However, she was vilified for it. Close reading of these books do suggest the class and options or lack thereof are so interlinked.
Yeah. I'm also remembering the advertising agency novel by Dorothy Sayers.
Murder Must Advertise.
Murder Must Advertise, which has Dorothy herself as one of the characters, because she also worked in an advertising agency. But that's a different kind of Bohemia. I mean, that dips into the aristocracy, drug taking, fast cars, and very fancy nightclubs. End of Bohemia, which is still Bohemia, but it's certainly not as impoverished. But the drug taking end and the drug running end are part of that. Yes, Sayers, she keeps coming up as a Bohemian adjacent. She certainly knew that of what she wrote. So,
and yeah. Harriet Vayne, I mean, I think is a wonderfully independent-minded, strong-minded character that was created by Dorothy Sayers. She does marry in the end. She marries Lord Peter Wimsey in the end, but only completely on her terms and on equal terms. She's absolutely insistent on that.
Yeah.
And it lasts. I mean, it lasts. I seem to remember, though sometimes I've read them all, that it lasts kind of through a number of novels when he's begging her to marry him, and she's saying, no.
Yeah.
I need to have.
She doesn't need to, because by the time he does convince her that, okay, yes, I will marry you, and it's a wonderful scene, she's already a very well-established novelist. She is financially independent, socially secure, everything that she could possibly want. So now she can choose. I named my younger daughter Harriet.
Oh, great.
For that very reason. Go, Monica.
Next question is by DSD, who's asking, was Elizabeth Bowen part of all this scene?
Elizabeth Bowen, I think she's a bit later. I don't know when Elizabeth Bowen moved from Ireland to London. But my impression, I don't know so much about her. My impression is that she's a little later. She's 30s rather than 20s. And my feeling is she's far too respectable to have gone anywhere near Bohemia. But that's just an impression. It's certainly not knowledge that's based on foundation. What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I'm just trying to remember, because Elizabeth Bowen is associated in my mind with something to do with spying, which sounds rather Bohemian to me.
That's the Second World War, though.
Okay, well, maybe I'll look that up anyway. Now, I seem to remember that Elizabeth Bowen was younger, definitely younger than these two, than Rose and Marjorie. but I'm pretty sure
Mm.
that Rose met her sometime in the, oh God, I can't remember whether it was the 20s or the early 30s,
Okay.
but was helpful to her at the beginning of her career. I can't remember exactly what it was that she did. Did she, oh, I don't know, did she, introduce her to some editors or something? I'm afraid I don't remember, but it was definitely something.
I think all the Bowen scholars are going, I want to tell you, but I can't.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure they, of course, they know better than I do, better than we do.
Not
Sorry,
my
I've got that
experience.
wrong.
Sorry, can't answer that one adequately.
Next is someone asking, what's Sarah's reading of the end of the book? I love the subtlety and ambiguity of the novel, including Anne's options at the end. So you don't have to say which way you think things go. I'm just interested if you have a view yourself.
So the end of the book, let me get this clear. So you would like to know what we think, which way Anne is going to go at the end of the book, which is the piece of the text that Sarah read out is actually more like in the middle. The end of the novel, which we've not talked about, and frankly, I don't want to because spoilers, many of you may not have read this. So I don't think we should take this question any further because it would be unfair on those.
Okay, but maybe I'd just like to say that I think that it's open-ended.
Yes.
I think it's open-ended for Anne. I mean, I think it's okay to say, Kate, that, for some of the others, they move on in one particular direction or another with their lives. Well, that's a kind of euphemism for getting married, I suppose. But with Anne, it's open-ended, I think.
Yeah, we don't know, but let's just not go any further. Sorry.
JL says, I'm reading These Names Make Clues, British Library Crime Classics by E.R.C. Lorak, a woman, 1937. Much set in Marylebone, where I live, and a very upmarket apartment, a boarding house for women in Hampstead, Belinda House.
Yeah.
Did Lorak know these two authors?
I don't. No, I don't. The British Library Classics have a real brilliance at extracting authors nobody has ever heard of from the bowels of the British Library catalogue and making them available. And I don't know that author. I'm sorry. I've not read them.
I don't know either, I'm afraid.
And next is Saab saying the New York Street Chambers were built in 1892 to house a single professional women, and the tenants were principally artists, authors. And yeah. Okay,
interesting fact. And actually that reminds me, the word chambers reminds me, at the end of Latchkey Ladies, we're introduced to another couple of professional young women. We've got Constance and her friend Miss Lee Hope, who are trainee barristers. Constance is the sister of Carmichael, who works for Dampier. And then we have this very brief but fascinating scene of these two young women talking to each other about points of law in a Inns of Court chambers. And Anne and her friend sort of creep away because these two young women are just so absorbed in discussing their studies and their professional context. And it's wonderful. And this was about the time that the first woman barrister qualified in London. I had this terrific collection called These Glorious Years from the Daily Express. It was published in 1939. It's like a digest of headlines and images from the Daily Express newspaper. And I read it when I was a child because my grandmother had it and I got it when she died. So it's rather tatty. But I've got these feminist milestones of the first woman barrister, and it must have been around 1919, 1920 when she qualified. So for Latchkey Ladies to include two young women barristers is terrific. Great advertisement for the history of law in Britain. Anyway, I'm sorry about it's a complete tangent, but the word chambers reminded me. Next one, Monica, please.
Well, we've come up, we have a couple of comments to end this talk with, mentioning, first of all, saying, thank you, Kate and Sarah, it's always illuminating, and then JL saying that is a great talk. Thank you. And they will be reading several of these books that we mentioned tonight.
Great. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think we've gone through every single question and comment that you've put in. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And thank you so much from Canada as well. They're coming in.
Wow, hello, Canada.
Lovely, lovely. And thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Just to close, thank you so much, Kate and Sarah, for joining us tonight. It's been, as always, a wonderful talk, and we're absolutely delighted. I just wanted to remind everyone that we will be sending in the next few days an email with our feedback form and a recording to this event. If you wish to find out more about the events of Westminster Libraries, do sign up to our newsletters, and we hope you will be joining us in our next event. Again, thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And a special thank you for myself and Sarah, who's here with me tonight.
You're welcome. Glad to do it. It was fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.